I'm Rachel, a single mother, 36 years old, living in a small suburb outside Chicago. And nothing in my life had prepared me for the moment. My own sister stood up in front of our entire extended family and mocked my son's autism like it was some sort of joke. It was during a family barbecue in late spring, one of those annual get togethers that always feel more like a performance than a reunion. My parents' backyard was filled with folding chairs, laughter that never reached the eyes, and casseroles no one really wanted to eat. And right there, amid the noise and chatter, my 9-year-old son, Jamie, was sitting quietly at the edge of the patio, sketching in his notebook like he always does when the world feels too loud. That's when Natalie, my younger sister, the golden child, the one with the 2 Ivy League degrees and a Pinterest-perfect family, looked over at him and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Is Jamie." Okay, I mean, he just sits there talking to himself. It's kind of creepy, Rach. Are you sure he's not, like, actually mentally challenged? Some of the guests laughed nervously. A few looked away. And my parents, my own mother and father, smiled. My dad said, "Well, Rachel was always a bit strange, too. Apple doesn't fall far." No one said a word to stop her. No one asked her to apologize. No one defended my child. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even reply. I just stood there, frozen in place, a glass of lemonade in my hand, and my heart threatening to crawl out of my chest. But what Natalie didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Paul, my cousin's husband, had been filming the whole event for a family documentary he was putting together as a surprise for Grandma's birthday. And that camera, it caught everything. Before I tell you how I quietly unraveled my sister's perfect world using nothing but truth and strategy, let me ask you something. Have you ever been forced to choose between keeping the peace and protecting someone you love? Because that day I made my choice, and it changed everything. To understand why that moment cut so deep, you'd have to understand my family. On paper, we're impressive, respectable. My parents live in a large colonial-style home they bought in the 80s. My father, Douglas, is a retired engineer who still wears his old company ID badge like a trophy. My mother, Margaret, was a school teacher for 30 years and now leads a church women's group. Their lives are built around image, what people think, what people see. Then there's Natalie, my little sister by 2 years. She's everything they ever wanted in a daughter. Blonde, sharp, charismatic. Captain of her debate team valedictorian, early admission to Yale. She married Daniel, a financial consultant, and had 2 picture-perfect kids by the time she turned 30. They live in a designer house with a white fence and matching golden retriever. Natalie and I are opposites in every way, where she moves through life like she owns every room. I've spent years trying to make myself small enough not to offend anyone. I was the quiet one, the sensitive one. I liked drawing, writing, reading things that didn't look impressive from the outside. I got a degree in early childhood education and started working with kids with special needs. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. And then came Jamie. He was born on a rainy Sunday morning. A small, serious baby with wide eyes and a quiet presence. I knew early on that he was different, not broken, just wired differently. He didn't talk much at first, but he could line up his toy trains by color and size before he was 3. He didn't like hugs from strangers, but he would sit for hours listening to music, his little fingers moving along imaginary keys. When he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at age 5, I wasn't surprised. I was relieved, honestly. It gave me a roadmap. It helped me understand how to support him, how to speak his language. My parents didn't take it well. "He just needs discipline," my father said. "You're labeling him too early," my mother added with that signature pursed lip disapproval. Natalie. She smiled tightly and said, "It's probably just a phase. Lots of kids are quirky." But behind closed doors, I overheard her whispering to her husband things like, "Rachel always wanted to be special. Now she has a special needs kid, it fits." Jamie, of course, never understood any of that. He just knew his cousins didn't invite him to play, that Grandma corrected the way he held his fork, that Grandpa always looked uncomfortable when he talked too long about outer space. And yet he tried. He drew birthday cards for everyone. He remembered people's favorite colors. He brought his sketchbook to family events and tried to show them the comic strips he made about Captain Logic, a superhero who didn't speak, but saved the day by noticing patterns others missed. but no one really saw him. No one except me. Maybe that's why I kept coming to these family functions year after year, hoping something might change. That someone would say Jamie's so thoughtful or he's really creative. But they never did. Until that afternoon on the patio, when Natalie chose to humiliate him in front of everyone. And something inside me finally cracked. I wasn't just Jamie's mother. I was his only line of defense. And I realized I had let them cross the line too many times, but not this time. Not anymore. Growing up in my family was like living inside a silent performance. Everything looked normal, neat, well-dressed, successful, but underneath was a constant undercurrent of conditional love. We weren't praised for who we were. We were praised for how well we matched the script. Natalie memorized her lines early. Straight A's, clean room, polite smiles. And I was always one beat off. I asked too many questions. I cried when I felt overwhelmed. I wrote poetry in my math notebook. They called it moody or dramatic, and I learned to keep things inside. There's one memory I go back to more than I should. I was 11. I had spent hours making a birthday card for our mom, cut out flowers, handwritten poem glitter from my school art kit. Natalie gave her a bouquet of roses our dad picked up from the store. Guess which one she thanked in front of everyone? I always loved Natalie's taste, she said, smiling at my sister. Then glancing at my card, she added, and Rachel. Next time maybe skip the glitter. It gets everywhere. I laughed along with everyone else, pretending I didn't feel the sting. Moments like that stacked up over the years like bricks in a wall. I stopped sharing my drawings. I stopped reading my poems out loud. I stopped raising my voice at the dinner table even when I had something to say. My dad wasn't cruel. He was distant. He liked silence, order, and control. If we cried, he left the room. If we laughed too loud, he asked us to lower our voices. He spent most of his time in the garage working on tools or watching financial news in the den. And when he did speak, it was always through a lens of logic and expectation. When I got a scholarship to a local community college instead of a university, he said, "Well, that's sensible." When I told him I was pregnant and the father wasn't in the picture, he said, "I hope this doesn't become another burden you can't handle." Even when Jamie was born, his first comment was, "Do you have a plan? Kids are expensive." Still, I kept showing up. I attended family holidays, brought homemade food, helped clean up, sent cards, remembered birthdays. I tried to be a daughter they could finally be proud of, even if it meant erasing parts of myself in the process. But the thing about constantly editing yourself is that after a while, you forget who you really are. That is until someone you love is treated the same way. The first time Jamie noticed he was being left out was at a Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. He had built a little Lego rocket ship and brought it over to show his cousins. They looked at it, then giggled and went back to their phones. Jamie stood there silently, then turned to me and whispered, "They don't like spaceships, do they?" I told him maybe they just didn't understand them the way he did. But deep down I recognized that tone, that quiet heartbreak, the one I used to carry in my chest when no one noticed my birthday drawings. At every family gathering since I watched more carefully, I started noticing the eye rolls, the exchanged glances, the way people talked about Jamie as if he weren't in the room. He just needs to be more social. Maybe you should take away those sketchbooks and give him a soccer ball. It's a shame. Rachel's such a nice person. But that kid, something's off. Each time I swallowed my anger. I reminded myself they didn't mean harm, that they just didn't understand. But understanding isn't a requirement for kindness. Then came the day when my mother pulled me aside after a barbecue and said, "You know, Natalie's son just got into the advanced math group. Maybe he can help Jamie catch up." "Jamie's already 2 grades ahead in math," I replied, confused. "Oh, well, he doesn't act like it," she said with a soft laugh. That was the moment I realized they didn't want to see Jamie's strengths. Because if they did, they'd have to question their entire framework. They'd have to admit that their golden child wasn't actually the better one. That the quiet, strange, sensitive parts of me had been worthy all along. And maybe they weren't ready for that. But I was. The Rachel they had known, the one who smiled politely and never made waves, was gone. because I had someone new to protect now, and I wasn't going to let them erase Jamie the way they had tried to erase me. The barbecue started like every other family event. Too many people, too much food, and too little authenticity. It was hosted at my parents' house, the same red brick colonial I grew up in. White trim American flag on the porch flower beds, trimmed to perfection. A picture of suburban pride. But to me, it always felt like a place you performed in, not lived. Paul, my cousin's husband, had set up his camera equipment early. He'd been working on a family legacy documentary for my grandmother's 80th birthday. Her idea, of course. She wanted each family to record greeting stories and shared memories to play at the celebration next month. Paul, always the quiet observer, took it seriously. He had lapel mics, a DSLR with a boom mic attachment, and even ambient audio gear scattered discreetly around the patio. I arrived with Jamie a little late. He wore his favorite t-shirt with a galaxy print and carried his sketch pad under one arm. He never went anywhere without it. I brought homemade lemon bars and a half-hearted smile. We made the usual rounds hello to Uncle Mark and Aunt Lillian, a wave to Natalie's husband Daniel, a stiff hug from my mother. Natalie swept in from the kitchen wearing a cream-colored sundress and lip gloss that hadn't smudged in an hour. She gave me that smile, tight, rehearsed, mildly condescending. "Rachel," she said, drawing out my name like a sigh. "You made it. We were starting to think you'd bailed again." I smiled. "Good to see you too, Natalie." Jamie stayed close, his hand on my elbow. I felt him tense up whenever someone got too loud or too close. I leaned down. "You okay, buddy?" He nodded, eyes scanning the space. "I want to draw by the garden. It's quieter there." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll come check on you in a bit." The party unfolded around us. Grilled chicken lawn chairs, kids chasing bubbles. Natalie's boys played tag with a few cousins, shrieking and bumping into tables. No one batted an eye. Meanwhile, Jamie sat at the edge of the patio near the hydrangeas, drawing in his notebook and humming softly to himself. He was in his own world, a safe world where things made sense. That's when it happened. Natalie had just finished pouring herself another glass of sangria when she glanced over at Jamie and said louder than necessary, "Is Jamie okay?" The conversation around us paused. A few turned their heads. I mean, she went on laughing lightly. He just sits there talking to himself like he's in some kind of trance. It's a little unsettling. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. My lips parted, but no words came. Before I could respond, Natalie added, "Rach, I'm serious. Are you sure he's not actually mentally challenged? Because you keep saying he's gifted, but I'm just not seeing it." She looked around for laughter. Some gave polite chuckles. A few eyes dropped to their drinks. And then my father chimed in from the grill, flipping burgers. "Well, Rachel was always the weird one growing up. Guess the genes skipped a generation." My mother laughed, that high tinkling laugh she uses when she doesn't want to pick a side. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Jamie heard it. I saw it on his face. He looked up, blinking. The way his hands paused in mid-sketch. The way he turned back to his page, pressing harder with his pencil like it might shield him. I walked over slowly, knelt beside him. "You want to go home?" I whispered. "No," he said, barely audible. "I'm okay." But he wasn't. I stood and faced the patio. Natalie was already turned away, chatting with another cousin. My parents were arguing about whether the burgers needed more seasoning. They had all moved on, like nothing had happened. Except it had. And someone had noticed. Paul caught my eye from across the yard. He wasn't holding his camera anymore, but I knew he'd been filming during the comment. I saw the red standby light blinking a few feet away on a nearby tripod. He walked over later while I stood at the drink table alone. "Hey," he said quietly. "Just so you know, I got all of that. Every word." I blinked. "You did?" He nodded. The mic near the patio picked it up. "I can cut it out of the final video, of course, if you'd prefer." I hesitated, then asked, "Can I get a copy?" He looked at me carefully. "Sure. I'll send it over tonight." That evening after we left, Jamie was quiet in the car. He watched out the window, fiddling with his pencil. I tried to make small talk, asked about his drawing, but he only mumbled a few words. When we got home, he went straight to his room. Later, I found a drawing on the kitchen table. It was of a boy standing in a crowd. All the people had speech bubbles saying things like strange, creepy, not normal. But the boy had a bubble over his head, too. It said, "I still have something to say." I stared at it for a long time. And that's when I knew I couldn't let this go. I didn't sleep that night. Jamie's drawing stayed on the table, and I kept walking past it again and again. Every time I looked at the boy standing alone in a sea of judgment, something inside me ached. He had drawn himself as the outsider again. And this time, he was old enough to understand why. Around midnight, I sat on the edge of his bed. He was half asleep, curled up with his headphones on, listening to the instrumental piano playlist he always used to calm his thoughts. I brushed a strand of hair off his forehead and whispered, "You are not broken. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you are." His eyes fluttered open for a second. "They don't like me," he said softly. "They don't understand you," I corrected. "Same thing." The words hit me harder than I expected. I kissed his cheek and walked quietly back to the living room where my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Paul. Subject: footage, as requested. There was a link to a shared drive. I clicked through and found a short clip, 4 minutes of casual patio footage, a breeze in the background, distant laughter, then Natalie's voice unmistakable. "Are you sure he's not like actually mentally challenged?" Followed by my father's offhand comment, my mother's laugh. There it was, captured, unfiltered, ugly. I listened to it once, then twice. Then I saved it. At first I didn't know what I would do with it. Part of me thought maybe I'd keep it as a reminder, something to revisit in the future when I started doubting myself. But the next day, Jamie refused to bring his sketchbook to school. He left it on his shelf and told me I don't want the other kids to think I'm weird. That was it. That's the moment I decided I wouldn't just hold on to the clip. I would use it, not to shame, not to punish, but to protect. Because if Natalie could say something like that about a child and feel confident enough to say it in public in front of family, who's to say she wouldn't do worse in front of strangers? Who's to say she wasn't saying those things about other children, about other families in other rooms without cameras? I started small. I reached out to a friend in the local parenting group, someone I knew was on the advisory board of our school's PTA. I asked casually if the school still had Natalie's application on file for the volunteer parent committee. "She's up for approval next week," my friend replied. "Why?" I paused. Then I said, "I think there's something you should hear." I sent the clip. Only the audio. No editing, no commentary. I didn't tell her what to think. Within 2 days, I received a text, "Rachel, I had no idea. Thank you for speaking up. That's not the kind of parent we want representing our school." And just like that, the decision was made. Not by me, but by the people who heard the truth. I didn't blast the clip online. I didn't write a takedown post. I didn't even confront Natalie. I let her words speak for themselves. What surprised me most was how quickly others began reaching out. Parents from our community messaged me quietly. Some had stories. Some offered support. A few said they'd had uncomfortable experiences with Natalie, too small things, subtle jabs, backhanded compliments, comments about normal kids. For the first time, I realized it wasn't just Jamie. And it wasn't just me. Natalie had spent years walking through rooms saying things that cut people down, and no one ever stopped her. Until now. The thing about consequences is they don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they slip in through the cracks unnoticed at first. A canceled meeting, a missed invitation, a name slowly fading from a group thread. That's how it began for Natalie. About a week after I shared the clip with the PTA contact, the school board quietly removed her name from the upcoming volunteer list. There was no announcement, just a line through her name in the official email followed by "position under review." She called me 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Rachel, her voice was sharp, controlled. "I just heard some ridiculous rumor that someone submitted an audio clip to the school board. Something taken out of context. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" She paused, then added with that signature superiority. "Look, I know you've always been a little sensitive, but dragging family into school politics, that's low even for you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because it wasn't just the school board that had heard the clip. One of the parents in the community group I belonged to was also part of a local autism support network. She asked me if she could share the clip confidentially at the next awareness session for caregivers and advocates. Again, I said yes, and within days it reached more ears. The clip never went viral in a sensational way. It wasn't broadcast on TV or plastered across social media, but it spread exactly where it needed to, among teachers, counselors, support workers, and parents who knew what it felt like to watch a child be misunderstood. I didn't name Natalie. The audio named her for me. What happened next was what people call quiet accountability. A teacher from her son's class emailed the school principal expressing concern about Natalie's behavior around neurodiverse children. Another parent withdrew from a carpool arrangement with her. A neighbor stopped waving. And Natalie, used to being admired, invited included, started noticing. I heard from a friend that she had emailed the school board to clarify the misunderstanding. In her message, she apparently claimed she was joking that it was taken out of context, and that her words had been misinterpreted by someone with a personal agenda. It didn't work. The board issued a formal statement emphasizing their commitment to inclusive language and their zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory comments. They didn't name her, but everyone knew. At the next PTA meeting, her seat was empty. And that was only the beginning. Around the same time, Jamie's school hosted a community night for families with special needs children. I almost didn't go. I wasn't sure if Jamie would be comfortable, but he surprised me. "I want to show them my drawings," he said. "Is that okay?" It was more than okay. He brought a folder filled with sketches, spaceships, superheroes, diagrams of imaginary cities. He stood beside his display table, shy at first, but then smiling when someone asked him questions. One of the counselors approached me and said, "He has a gift. You know that, right?" I nodded. He just needed space to show it. Later that night, after we got home, I found a message in my inbox from Natalie. This time, it was longer. "I don't know what you're trying to do," she wrote. "I made one offhand comment, and now my name is being dragged through the mud. You always hated me. You've been waiting for a chance like this." She went on about how I was jealous, how I was turning people against her, how I had exaggerated everything. I stared at the message for a while. Then I deleted it. Because it wasn't about Natalie, not anymore. It was about Jamie. And the next time someone like Natalie opened their mouth to say something cruel disguised as cleverness, I wanted them to pause. I wanted them to wonder who might be listening, who might be recording, who might finally say no more. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Control. Not over others, but over my own boundaries, over what I allowed near my child, over the narrative I chose to carry. And I wasn't letting go of that again. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach my parents. When Natalie began feeling the walls close in her reputation, fraying her volunteer opportunities, drying up, she turned where she always did when things got uncomfortable, back to our parents. I knew it had happened when my mother called me one evening with a voice that was sugar-coated but tight. "Rachel, honey, we need to talk. I'd been expecting this. What about—" She paused. "Your sister is very upset. She says you've been spreading things about her, taking private family moments and twisting them." I leaned back in my chair, phone on speaker. Jamie was in the other room playing with a music app on his tablet. I kept my voice calm. "I didn't twist anything. I shared a recording one she made in front of the entire family." "She was joking," my mother said sharply. "People joke, Rachel. You've always been too sensitive." "And Jamie?" I asked. Was he being too sensitive? When he stopped bringing his sketch pad to school? When he asked me if he was broken? Is that just sensitivity too? There was a silence, a long one. "Look," she said. "Eventually we all say things we don't mean. But what you're doing now, humiliating your sister in public, that's not how family should behave." Family. That word again. I had to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. "I'm not humiliating her," I said. "She did that herself. All I did was stop pretending it didn't happen." She started to speak, but I cut in. "For years, you've watched this family treat me like a second thought. You've dismissed Jamie. You've laughed off every cruel thing Natalie said. You all stood there while she humiliated my child, and not one person stood up for him. That's not fair. It's not fair that Jamie has to learn he doesn't belong in his own family." I ended the call. It took less than 24 hours for the next wave to come. My father emailed me. It was short, cold. A list of bullet points about family loyalty, public image, and how my actions had jeopardized the family's standing in the community. He ended with, "If you continue down this path, you're choosing division, and we will respond accordingly." That same day, I was removed from the family group chat. Natalie, however, didn't stop there. She posted a thinly veiled Facebook status. Some people build their entire identity around victimhood, even at the cost of their own blood. Sad. I didn't reply, but others did. Several parents from the school commented publicly defending neurodiverse children and calling out ableist language. Someone posted an autism awareness article. Someone else quoted Natalie's exact words from the clip. The post was deleted an hour later. Later that week, I got a text from my aunt, my dad's sister, Elaine. "I heard what happened. I just want you to know. I'm proud of you. I wish I had done the same when my daughter was bullied by this family for her anxiety issues." I wasn't sure how to reply, but I said thank you. The fracture had begun. It wasn't loud. No one slammed doors or yelled at Thanksgiving, but the cracks were visible. Cousins unfollowed each other. Plans to meet for Grandma's birthday were suddenly postponed. Natalie's perfect photo grid slowed. She went quiet on social media. One by one, members of the family started reaching out not to confront, but to admit. "I saw what happened at the party. I should have said something. Jamie's a sweet kid. You're a good mom. I wish I'd had the courage to speak up." But the most unexpected message came from Paul. "I know this wasn't your intention," he said during a call, "but that clip, it opened people's eyes. A lot of us have let Natalie get away with too much for too long. We laughed along. We said nothing. You stopped that." I thanked him. But something still sat heavy in my chest. Because at the end of the day, what I had wanted wasn't this kind of fracture. What I still wanted, was a family that could look at Jamie and see him, not as broken, not as inconvenient, but as whole. Later that night, Jamie asked me a question as I tucked him into bed. "Mom, are we still going to Grandma's birthday?" I hesitated. "Do you want to?" He thought for a moment. "Will Natalie be there?" "I'm not sure yet." He nodded slowly, then said, "If she is, I don't want to go." I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Then we won't." And in that moment, I realized we weren't losing family. We were choosing peace. After the fallout with my family, I expected to feel hollow, lost maybe, regretful even. But instead, I felt lighter, not because the situation was easy, it wasn't, but because for the first time in my life, I had drawn a boundary and held it. And something about that simple act, saying no more, and meaning it, had shifted the ground beneath my feet. At first, our days felt quieter. No family group texts. No phone calls from my mother asking if I'd seen Natalie's latest achievement. No guilt-laced dinner invitations to navigate. Just me and Jamie. But it wasn't lonely. Because in that silence, something else began to grow. It started with small gestures. The parent from Jamie's class who dropped off a box of gluten-free cookies with a note that read, "For your brave little artist." A counselor from school who asked if Jamie might want to display his drawings in the upcoming student gallery night. Then one evening, I received an email from a local support group for parents of neurodivergent children. One of the facilitators had heard about what happened at the barbecue. Apparently, word had spread through the community faster than I ever intended, and she invited me to join. I hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready to share anything out loud. But the following Thursday, I walked into a modest church basement filled with folding chairs, coffee cups, and people who knew the language of worry. I sat in the back, listened. Then slowly, in pieces, I started to speak. Not just about Jamie, but about me. About what it felt like to be the quiet child in a loud family. About the shame that clung to me long after I left home. About how I had spent most of my life trying to shrink myself so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable around my differences or my sons. They nodded. Not out of pity, but understanding, and I realized maybe for the first time that family could be something we chose, something we built. A collection of people who saw you and said you belong. Not because you matched their idea of normal, but because you were honest about who you were. That group became a lifeline, We exchanged stories, advice, resources. One of the moms ran a small art studio and invited Jamie to a sensory-friendly painting class. He came home with blue-streaked hands and the widest grin I'd seen in weeks. Then came the biggest surprise of all, community night. Our local rec center hosted a celebration for neurodivergent children and their families. There were booths, performances, art exhibits. One of the organizers asked if Jamie would like to play a short piece on the keyboard. He had recently started taking lessons with a teacher who specialized in students with sensory sensitivities. I wasn't sure he'd say yes, but he did. He practiced for days. Not just the notes, but how to handle the noise of the room, the lights, the pressure. The night of the event, I stood backstage with him holding his hand as he waited for his name to be called. "Are you nervous?" I asked. He nodded. "A little." I knelt down and looked him in the eyes. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you." He smiled. "I think I can do that." And he did. He walked onto the stage, sat at the keyboard, and played a short, simple melody he had composed himself. It was called Quiet Galaxy, soft, measured, full of wonder. When he finished, the room applauded, and for the first time, I saw Jamie stand tall, chin-lifted eyes scanning the crowd, searching not for approval, but connection. That night as we drove home, he looked out the window and said, "Do you think I'll ever be normal?" My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "No," I said. "I think you'll be something better." He turned to me, puzzled. "What's better than normal?" "Free," I said. "You'll be free. Free to take up space. Free to speak. Free to draw and sing and build imaginary galaxies without apology." And so would I. Healing didn't arrive in a single moment. It crept in slowly through the cracks that pain had left behind. For weeks, I avoided anything that reminded me of my parents or Natalie. I deleted old photos, ignored birthdays, and let silence hang in place of family dinners and holiday plans. But then one afternoon in late October, I received a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter, handwritten on thick cream-colored stationery. It was from my mother. The first line stopped me. "I don't know how to apologize for laughing when your son was humiliated." I stood in my kitchen holding the paper like it might burn me. The letter wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. She didn't justify her actions. She didn't defend Natalie. She didn't even ask me to forget. She simply admitted she had been wrong, that she hadn't protected me when I was younger, that she hadn't protected Jamie when he needed it most. And she said she didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped one day to be worthy of being in our lives again. I folded the letter and left it on the counter for 2 days. When I finally picked it up again, I read it with softer eyes. Not because I was ready to let her back in, but because I saw something I hadn't seen from her in years: humility. She followed it up with a second letter the next week. This one included a drawing Jamie had given her last Christmas, which she had apparently framed and placed on her desk. She said it reminded her daily of how easy it is to miss the beauty in something just because it doesn't look the way you expect. I didn't write back right away. Instead, I asked Jamie if he wanted to see Grandma. He thought for a long time before answering. "Only if she says she's sorry to me, not just you." That was fair. So I arranged a short neutral visit at a local coffee shop. No grand gestures, just a table by the window, hot chocolate, and a woman trying to make peace with the people she'd hurt. My mother arrived wearing no makeup, her hands trembling slightly. She brought a small gift, a new sketchbook with Jamie's name printed on the cover. I didn't come to fix everything she said. I just came to say I'm sorry. Jamie didn't speak right away, but when she handed him the book, he turned it over in his hands and said quietly, "Thank you." It was a start. We didn't talk about Natalie, we didn't talk about the clip or the fallout or the fractured family. We just talked about small things: pumpkin muffins, the weather, Jamie's favorite song. And when we left, he said, "I think I might want to see her again, but not too often." "That's okay," I said. "You get to choose." Later that month, we had a small gathering at our apartment. I called it our chosen family night. Paul came with his camera packed away, just holding a casserole dish and a sincere smile. A couple of other moms from the support group brought snacks. One of Jamie's teachers stopped by with her daughter. My Aunt Elaine, who had quietly supported me from the start, joined too. Near the end of the evening, my mother knocked on the door. She hadn't assumed she was invited, but she came just in case. Jamie looked at me. Should we let her in? I nodded. Up to you. He opened the door. She came in quietly, took a seat near the back and listened as Jamie stood by the window and sang a soft, unsteady rendition of a song he'd learned in music class. It wasn't polished. It wasn't loud, but it was brave. When he finished, the room applauded. And my mother, eyes, wet hands shaking, whispered to me, I almost missed this. I looked at her and said, a lot of us almost did. 6 months after that barbecue, our lives don't look the same. And I think that's the point. What started as a cruel comment at a family event became a mirror I couldn't ignore anymore. It reflected everything I'd spent years trying not to see: the imbalance, the dismissal, the quiet cruelty that had been normalized for too long. But it also became something else. A beginning. Jamie sings now. Not loudly, not often, but without shame. Sometimes I hear him humming in the kitchen or softly playing piano in the early morning before school. His drawings have changed too. They're still full of galaxies and strange creatures, but now more often than not there's someone in the middle, a small figure standing tall. Sometimes it's him, sometimes it's a mother. And I've grown too. I no longer show up just to keep the peace. I show up when it's safe, when it's healthy, when I'm whole enough to offer something honest. I stopped performing for a family that only accepted curated versions of me. I started building a community around people who see worth in vulnerability, not perfection. As for Natalie, we haven't spoken since. And maybe that's okay. Some relationships don't need to be repaired. They need to be released. I used to think family was everything, that no matter what happened, blood was the thread that held us all together. But I've learned that love is the real thread, and it has to be mutual. It has to be respectful. It has to be earned. The most unexpected part of all this: I don't hate them. Not Natalie. Not my parents. Not even the people who stood silently on that patio while my child was mocked. I understand now that some people are too deep in their own denial to see the harm they cause, and I'm not here to punish them. I'm here to protect my son and protect myself. That's what boundaries are. Not walls, but doors you choose when to open and to whom. To anyone watching this who has been made to feel small by people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, this is what I want to tell you. You're not broken. You're not too sensitive. You're not overreacting. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave the table where love is conditional and build your own. You don't owe anyone your silence when it costs your peace. You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who only see your flaws. And if you're a parent, especially to a child who walks through this world a little differently, know this: your voice matters. Your protection matters. And when you choose your child over keeping up appearances, you're choosing what's right. Jamie once asked me, what's better than being normal? And now I think I finally know how to answer him. Being kind, being real, being safe, and most of all, being free. Thank you for listening to our story. If any part of it resonated with you, feel free to share your own in the comments. Because sometimes healing starts when we realize we're not alone. And if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads between protecting someone vulnerable and keeping the peace, remember, peace built on silence is not peace. It's just fear in disguise.